I think money in general is important. Anybody is lying if they say, right, it is not important. You need
Anybody who's going to an IIM or any B school obviously cannot say that money is not important.
Right, but it is not enough. I think what was fundamentally very important for me, and I guess this is more important for me coming as a woman, and some of you might be able to relate to this, was to be financially independent. And at that point, it did seem like an MBA would help me get there.
What did you do at Goldman Sachs?
I think in day-to-day life, you end up doing a lot of Excel, making a lot of reports, making a lot of recommendations, preparing data for board of directors at Goldman to look at, preparing data for regulators, Bank of England, Deutsche Bank.
Okay, awesome. Super happy to invite our first guest. We've got a lot of requests from within the community to want to meet investment bankers, right? And we have somebody here who's worked with Goldman Sachs in the past and is now a partner at a boutique investment bank, which I'm sure the way they are going is going to, blossom into a major investment bank in India going forward. So without further ado, can I request Payal Jain to join me on stage? Thank you so much, Payal, for making it and joining us today for Konversations Cafe.
Thank you, Ankit, and the entire team for sort of setting this up. Super excited to be here. Thank you. Thanks again, Ankit.
So let's dive in, Payal. Tell us about your early life. Where were you born and how did you end up taking up commerce and how did you get into SRCC?
I was brought up in Northeast in a city called Guwahati. Spent most of my childhood till I was about 16 there. Growing up, Guwahati and Assam generally at that stage was a developing state. There was a lot of action happening in terms of government subsidies that were coming in the state. Industrialization was happening. My father incidentally was a part of that journey. So learned a lot of my early business skills, early business insights from him. Every morning at 9 a.m. घर पर CNBC में वो red or green tickers चलते थे. I don't know how much of that has influenced my career, but definitely, definitely shaped conversations around how business works, how markets operate, how taxes and subsidies work, how public policy works. So some of that definitely must have had a subconscious influence on the choices that I've made.
And how did you end up going to SRCC? What makes SRCC such a hallowed place and what makes it special according to you?
Interestingly, I wanted to go to IIT Bombay. I don't know why, but at least at that age, IIT Bombay was my dream college. At some level, I think the shift happened and there was a more natural instinct towards business and economics. And I finally decided to go to Shri College of Commerce in Delhi University for a bachelor's in commerce. It gets a lot of media attention for sure every time the cutoffs come out. In our year was for the first time they came up with 100% cutoff, right? And it was just...
So you got 100%?
No, I think that 100% just gets a little hyped because the way you choose your subjects and the way the calculation, the math for Delhi University works. But I had a 96%, which was the cutoff for that year. Luckily made it in. I think, I believe that for all institutions, not just in India, but globally, a lot of filtering just happens at the entry stage, right? While the place is great and you have good professors and you have the entire Delhi University vibe, but some of you, I'm sure have gone to top undergrad colleges and you'll realize this and probably agree with me or not. You put a bunch of really smart and driven people in a room, they will figure out something. And I think that is what makes not just SRCC, but any of the B schools that you're headed to great, is because of the peer set that comes along with it and the learning that happens. While a lot of learning will happen in your classrooms and let's say in forums like these, but the largest part of it is just going to be from your peers. And that was true for SRCC.
So did the seeds of investment banking kind of get put in at SRCC? Like, when did you realize that you want to create a career in iBanking?
I think I wanted to create a career in finance for sure very early on. I didn't know what that meant. At that point, it was still not as easily. I mean, I didn't have a smartphone till my second year, third year at SRCC, so it was not as easily accessible. So while I knew I wanted to do something in finance, I don't think I was sure of what that exactly meant. Interestingly, this was the time Barclays has a global internship program that is very well regarded in London and New York and other places. They launched it for the first time in India, and they came to Delhi University to hire. Again, some to hard work, some to luck. I was a part of the 5 or 6 people that they had hired across Delhi University as their first cohort.
But was money ever an attraction? Like, was a career in finance because you were interested in finance, or did you realize very early on कि यार इसमें तो बहुत पैसा बन सकता है, so I should take up finance or iBanking as a career?
I think money in general is important. And it is right. Anybody is lying if they say right. It is not important. You need
Anybody who's going to an IIM or any B school obviously cannot say that money is not important.
Right. But it is not enough. While it is very important, and how much money is important is a question that each of us have to answer for ourselves. But what I can definitely say that it is not enough, right? If you hate what you're doing, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, at some stage, right, you will, while you'll keep going for a couple of years because the money is great and there is a kick that happens maybe at the end of every month when salary hits your bank account or when the bonus hits at the year end. But I don't know if that kick is going to be enough for you to, build a career, build a long career around it, right?
What was your dream at that point? Why did you get into a B school?
I think the B school decision was, again, more of chance than by choice. I think what was fundamentally very important for me, and I guess this is more important for me coming as a woman, and some of you might be able to relate to this, was to be financially independent. This was a big part of me growing up. This was a big part of how I operate, to be financially independent. And at that point, it did seem like an MBA would help me get there. And the specifics, I think life has helped figure out.
So how was the CAT prep journey for you? Was it easy, hard?
It wasn't easy. I don't know how your experience has been. It can sometimes be grueling. I did enjoy it quite a bit because it allowed me, it allows for a lot of interesting problem solving and different ways of thinking about a problem. So I did really enjoy that process. And that's and then I think CAT happened, and I had an interview call with IIM Indore and a couple of other IIMs at that point. I did prepare a lot for the interview as well. I was already reading a lot of business books, business newspapers in preparing for, in the lead up to the interview. That sort of helped. In fact, most of my interview was around a business book called The Goal, which is a book in operations management that some of you might read. It's written by a consultant called Elihu Goldratt. And interestingly, the professor was an ops professor and was very interested that I'd read the book, and a lot of conversation around that happened. That was, I think, cracked IIM Indore, sort of landed there.
Again, so what was the dream then? Were you clear at that time कि अभी तो after MBA I'll get into iBanking, or were you still figuring out?
One, I think when you go to at Indore, there are a lot of investment banks that come in even before your summers begin, for what they call the workshops and networking sessions before. JP Morgan did that, Deutsche Bank did that, Goldman Sachs did that. This was before my summer, so this was the first term of MBA. I spent a great deal of time on those workshops. Coincidentally, luckily because of the SRCC background, I was shortlisted for all of them. Happened to meet, senior MDs there, understand the work in a lot more detail than what some of the other job profiles allow you to, right? Because they came, interacted for a full half day with that. That sort of helped me directionally understand that investment banking was what I wanted to do. But coincidentally, before the summer placements could happen, there was a day -2, -3 private equity fund called Samara Capital that had come to campus for the first time. And they were offering a summer role, which sounded very, very interesting to me because it's also an industry that's very difficult to crack right out of campus. So for the summer role, I decided to choose Samara and they decided to choose me for some reason. That, I think, was the most transformational point of my career. At that point, I realized that this is the ecosystem that I wanted to work in. I spent roughly 2 months there. We were working on building our thesis, building our investing thesis in the microfinance sector. At that point, there was a lot of action that was happening. RBI had come up with its own set of small finance banking licenses and payments banking licenses, a lot of which we're now seeing in the form of what Paytm and the UPI and the Bandhan banks of the world, of India are doing. That was sort of an inflection point in my journey, in my career. Because I saw firsthand, how investing worked and the ability that finance investors and investment bankers and the role that they play as enablers in the ecosystem, right? We exist to enable founders, promoters to go out, do their thing, build businesses, and fill in a very critical gap in that ecosystem. And that understanding of why that was such an important role, and it is so fundamental to capitalism itself, right? So why that was such a critical role to fill was something that helped define my career.
Okay, I think a lot of people who are watching this don't understand the difference between, the buy side, sell side. What do private equity firms do? So what is the difference between, say, what a private equity does, what is it that venture capitalists do, and what do investment banks do? If you can quickly give people an explanation of that in simple language.
Sure. All three operate in the same ecosystem, and that ecosystem is to help businesses find the right kind of capital. Capital can come in different forms and shape. It can come in the form of equity capital, preference capital, debt, and across that, a lot of different categories. Investment bankers are advisors and they help raise capital. They are not funding from their own book. They are not, their task is they're essentially brokers as a part of the process. They help find companies help companies find the right investors, and investors find the right companies, right? Private equity and venture capital funds are on the buy side, where they have their own funds, which they've again raised from different LPs and limited partners and different institutions globally, but they are deploying that book across and building their own portfolio, right? Even amongst that, you have what is called the venture capital world and you have the private equity world. Venture capital typically is the more risk-taking capital. So they will bet on early stage businesses, those moonshot ideas that people want to work on, and they operate again from a seed stage, Series A, Series B, all the way to Series FG and pre-IPO rounds. Private equity capital, on the other hand, invests in more stable, growing industries, which are more established, so they're more growth capital in that sense. That's the broad difference, but the world that we're operating in, a lot of it is getting blurred. Private equity is doing venture capital is doing private equity, so there's a lot of mix and match that's happening. Different funds and different fund partners define their own thesis on where and how they want to operate and how they add value, which is where they will all find their unique positioning in this market. But that's the broad difference.
Before we get into what I really want to discuss is the deals that you've done. Because I think that's where a lot of the glamour lies. But quickly about how was your campus life? Did you do a lot of nerdy stuff on campus and kept on studying again? Because obviously to get into Goldman Sachs, you would have needed at least a good academic score, etc. You might have got a shortlist, but you would have had to study a lot. And you had, I think, a 450 batch or?
Correct. In fact, more, because we have the IPM batch that comes along.
You had almost 500 plus people that you had to compete with. So were you always like anxious, alert on campus ke mere ko bas compete karna hai continuously? Because that's also part of B school life that often people ignore. How did you manage that, and what did you do on campus?
I think people who are close to me would say this about me, but at least how my friends describe me is as a very carefree person. I don't generally get anxious about a lot of things. I somehow, it's worked for me, but I somehow have this attitude, figure out kar lenge.
So, what were, say, if I were to ask you, what are the 2 or 3 big things you got from your B school? What was that?
So I think one, the exposure and that clarity, meeting folks from places like JP, Deutsche, meeting the partners at Samara Capital, that was one. Also, I think JP Morgan, I don't know if they still do it, but they used to run a national investment banking challenge, which they open up to a few B schools. We participated in that. We went to Bombay, presented it to their banking senior leadership. So those were all opportunities that helped you refine your thinking, helped you bounce off ideas with people who were there, who figured it out, or to some effect, or they're at a place where you want to get to. So that I think was the second. I think also did a lot of case competitions, went to a lot of other B schools and colleges, met a lot of peers, exchanged thoughts around what other people are working on, what people in your batch are thinking, working with them on these items. The third piece was I was very active in the student council at campus. I managed the treasury there, and then coincidentally went on to do a treasury role at Goldman. But I managed the treasury of the student council, which allowed me a lot of exposure on people who work and allowed me access to people who were coming in for either speaking sessions or guest sessions, or people who were fairly used to ask a lot of questions to all recruiters who came on campus. Mine almost always ended up being the first hand that would go up to ask questions around, either the role or what they thought about the certain industry, or sometimes, about the gold rate that's going on. So those were some key takeaways. I think those were key highlights of my journey.
Okay, now let's come to Goldman Sachs, a big brand, probably the most desired brand in the investment banking space for sure. So how did that happen, and what did you do at Goldman Sachs? Because I think again people won't know, okay, what does a treasury at Goldman Sachs actually do? So आपने काम क्या किया वहाँ पे?
Goldman, I spent 2 years. I also had an opportunity to spend a couple of weeks at the New York Goldman office, which was very exhilarating, right? You're at the top of the finance world in Manhattan, at the Goldman Sachs New York office. Very overwhelming yet humbling at the same time. So in treasury at Goldman, what we do is a bunch of things, right? As a bank, Goldman Sachs, let's say at that point, had $1 trillion balance sheet. That balance sheet is split over multiple different asset classes, which could be, some could be long tenured assets, some are more liquid assets. And it almost, given the 2008 crisis, after that, liquidity became a very important challenge for both regulators and the top leadership at different investment banks, to make sure that in the event that another stress situation happens, do banks have enough buffer to tide over that crisis, which often resulted in the fact that 25 to 30% of a bank's balance sheet was held in what you would call liquid assets. This also means that those liquid assets don't make as much money for you as some of the other assets do, right? So it's a fine balancing act where you have to make sure कि आप asset liability match भी कर रहे हो, you're optimizing for what is the return that you can make. And this gets further complicated if you think about Goldman as an international bank. You have assets across different currencies, across different entities, right? So you have a holdco, you will have a entity in Germany, in London, multiple entities in US, an entity in India. So how do I manage liquidity across different entities, across different currencies, across different tenures to optimize for both risk as well as return? I think that's the broader problem statement. I think in day-to-day life, you end up doing a lot of Excel, making a lot of reports, making a lot of recommendations, preparing data for board of directors at Goldman to look at, preparing data for regulators, Bank of England, Deutsche Bank, the Federal Reserve, for them to look at. So that's the side that I worked on for 2 years. When a very early stage venture capital fund comes in, typically they will look at a dilution for the first check anywhere between 15 to 25%. Now I'll let you guys do the math.
So essentially what you're saying is that if somebody would have invested in a company, say $5 million, and would have probably gotten, say, 20% of that company, then if the company's valuation today is $1 billion, then how many X has that essentially gone? And typically the returns in the VC world are could be anywhere between 25x to even, I think I've heard numbers like 500x also.
Absolutely. You're absolutely bang on this, because that's how the VC model works.